Greetings and welcome to the University of Minnesota Presidential Search Online Conversation. My name is Jim du Bois, and I'm your moderator and host today. I'm an alumnus of the U and a former chair of the University of Minnesota Alumni Association. Thank you to all the alumni and friends of the university community who have taken time to join us today for this important discussion. As you know, University of Minnesota President Eric Kaler announced this past summer that he's stepping down from his role in July 2019. Throughout the month of September, the University of Minnesota Board of Regents and its Presidential Search Advisory Committee have been holding listening sessions in the Twin Cities and across the state to gather input on the qualities and characteristics important in the next president. The University of Minnesota Alumni Association is proud to host this online forum in collaboration with the Board of Regents and the Presidential Search Advisory Committee. Before we get started, I have a couple of items to cover regarding how to participate in this webinar. You have joined the presentation listening using your computer's speaker system by default. If you would prefer to listen over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane of your GoToWebinar panel and dial-in information will be displayed. If you experience audio difficulties while listening via your computer's speakers, this can be caused by having multiple software applications open, which can use up your computer's bandwidth and affect network performance. Listening in on a wireless signal may also affect your performance. Feel free to close any unnecessary applications on your computer. During this webinar, you will be able to type in questions and feedback regarding the presidential search. Questions are welcome, and you may submit them at any time. We want to hear from you. Please type in your questions in the questions pane on your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll cover as many as our time allows. It's now my pleasure to introduce our two guests today. Abdul M. Omari is a regent of the University of Minnesota in an at-large seat, elected in 2013. Regent Omari is serving as chair of the Presidential Search Advisory Committee. He holds 3 degrees from the University of Minnesota, a bachelor's degree in global studies from the College of Liberal Arts, master's degree in public policy from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and Ph.D. in comparative and international development education from the College of Education and Human Development, University of Minnesota Twin Cities. Regent Omari also serves on the boards of YMCA Greater Twin Cities, Achieve Minneapolis, Travel Impact Growth, and Civic Eagle. Welcome, Regent Omari.
Thank you, Jim.
Alberto Pimentel co-founded Storbeck and Pimentel Associates in 2007 and has led and managed hundreds of search assignments for a variety of public and private universities and colleges. He also has participated with nonprofit organizations, governmental agencies over the course of the past 20 years. He has successfully recruited candidates for both academic and administrative positions for university systems, as well as individual campuses. Mr. Pimentel is online right now. Welcome, Mr. Pimentel.
Thank you very much.
At this point, we will entertain your questions. Let's start a little bit talking about the process of the search for president. Regent Omari, how has that been going?
Yeah, Jim, I mean, first and foremost, I'll say it's been going well. The level of engagement has been very high, and we're excited about that. When the president announced that he would be stepping down in 2019, the chair and vice chair of the Board of Regents, Dave McMillan and Ken Powell, respectively, very early on were committed to making this as inclusive and as open and transparent as we possibly could, really as legally possible we could. And what that meant was beginning very early on, asking for nominations for the Presidential Search Advisory Committee, something that we haven't seen in the past. And for the committee alone, we had 500 nominations with over 400 individual names. And so just looking at that level of interest from the university community was something that was exciting for us and something that showed the importance of this moment, this exciting moment that we have. Subsequent to that, we announced community listening sessions, and those just finished this past week on Wednesday. And what we did as a committee was traveled the entire state to all 5 campuses. So we started last week Monday up in Crookston, and then we drove to Morris and came back, or we're in Morris on Tuesday, and then came back to the Twin Cities campus and did sessions on the St. Paul and West Bank campuses last week Wednesday. And then from there on Thursday, we drove up to Duluth, kind of took off on Friday and did our regular jobs. And then Monday, we reconvened on the Minneapolis campus here in the Twin Cities, and then wrapped up 2 days ago in Rochester on Wednesday. And so to put it simply, we hit the road and we started listening to what folks were interested in telling us. And we've had over 500 attendees at those listening sessions. And the website that if you're logged on and able to see, you'll see the presidential search website there at the bottom of the slide. And that's an opportunity, an ongoing opportunity for folks to add comments. And yesterday we convened all the comments, and there were over 400 online submissions for folks that wanted to add input to the process. And I mean, this is still early. That site still remains open for feedback and input. And that's in addition to all the emails that we received with folks that have added input. Now, on the other side of this, what I have been doing is meeting with groups of community members, groups of local politicians, including the governor, the speaker of the House, the president of the Senate, so on and so forth, as well as I had a session with the UMAA leadership team this session here. I've met a number of times with students, whether it was the student representatives to the Board of Regents or the Minnesota Student Association. I'll be with the Student Senate actually tomorrow. They got me on a weekend. And also business leaders. And so we've been talking to business leaders, and we're going as far and deeply as possible to hear what folks think lies ahead for us and what they want to hear from us. So I'll stop there, and then we can kind of continue. I see there's some one question up here.
Yes, the question is, the U has never had a female president. Will you be making a concerted effort to recruit qualified women to apply?
Thank you for the question, Laura. The simple answer is yes, and I'll take it perhaps a step further to say that we will be making concerted efforts, and already have, to recruit qualified women, qualified people of color, added to that pool as well. And what I have found in my short time volunteering in the world of presidential searches is that there are actually a whole lot of qualified women and people of color within the academic sphere, as well as outside of the academic sphere. And so we've been committed to looking far and wide and making sure that we have a robust, diverse pool so that we can move forward in that way. And I can just mention that if you look at the search committee, the advisory committee, you'll be able to see the breadth and depth of all of the members on the committee that has a wide variety of diversity in many areas, not just based on gender balance, but also from communities of color as well as American Indian, and then a good mix of faculty, staff, community members, business, philanthropy, so on and so forth. And that will be able to add to our work in this area as well.
Regent Omari, as you traveled the state for the listening sessions, what are you hearing? What sort of general themes are emerging?
Yeah, the first thing I'll say is we're hearing it all, okay? And what I mean by that is, for every person that says go left, there's likely someone else that says go right. And so it will be a difficult task, but we have been putting together themes based on what we've been hearing on the campuses, and I can run through a few of those because we're starting to formulate what those themes are. And one major theme that seems to be, or that is emerging from the listening sessions, is that the University of Minnesota is well known, but it's also at a tipping point and a critical point in the institution's history, where there's a feeling of, if we are able to hire someone who can come in with a vision, with passion, energy, who's inspiring will be able to take that next step to international recognition and be with the best of the best. And so there's certainly a theme of hiring someone that can increase the university's national and international presence. Overwhelmingly, we hear folks talk about the importance of the institution to the state of Minnesota, and increasingly folks recognize and are very open about the importance and impact globally. And so a focus on promoting the 21st century land grant mission, and particularly thinking about the unique nature of the university being the state's land grant as well as its only research institution, and how we mesh those two things and pay special attention to those. In addition to that, we have been hearing a lot of good feedback around the need for connectedness across the system. And I think many folks on the Twin Cities campus have a tendency to forget that we have 5 campuses. And so folks are very interested in what the next president will be able to do in order to bring in someone who can really provide a level of structural and then also a culture of connectedness and, if you will, systemness to the institution has been something that we've been hearing. And then I'll just mention 2 or 3 more that have begun to arise. One is making sure that in the current state where, or the current age, I should say, where folks are questioning the value of higher education, to make sure that we have someone who is a devoted and unequivocal supporter and advocate of higher education and its importance broadly and then locally as well. Fundraising, of course, is a major one, which is tied to a desire that folks have to be thinking about the budget model and how we can have new revenue streams within higher education. And so those are 2 things that have really emerged. And then the last one comes back to Laura's first question, which is a desire and emphasis on the importance of diversity, inclusion, and equity at the institution.
We do have another question now. With the U touting its place as a top research university in the world, how important is it to hire a president with broad experience abroad, or even someone from a country other than the United States?
Well, so I'll tackle the last part first. Getting someone from abroad is certainly on the radar. The challenge oftentimes is that the United States higher education system is like no other, and it has a significant level of unique qualities and characteristics that makes it really the envy of the rest of the world. And so it would probably require that we found someone who has spent a significant amount of time in the United States in understanding the dynamics of higher education, and then perhaps, went somewhere else and has done work abroad. But it's definitely not off the table. The other thing that I'll note is, most folks that are at a point of taking a step to being a president of an institution as great as the University of Minnesota are world renowned. And so they're either known in their specific field, and whether that's an academic field or in some sort of other field, they're likely known across the world when we're looking to grab them.
We have another question now. These may be questions for the search firm. How will the process keep candidates from dropping out when their name is revealed? And also, will the vetting process look at their personal behavior to avoid the removal of a new president or candidate due to revelations of dishonesty or other unsavory behaviors?
Right. Yeah, so I can actually take that too, and then after I'm done, I'll turn to Alberto to chime in if I missed anything. Thanks for the question, Cheryl. The first thing is going to be, or the first part of that question is going to be likely unsatisfactory, so let me apologize now. We can do absolutely nothing to keep folks from dropping out, because we abide by the open meeting laws. And what that means is at the point where the Board of Regents decides that it will interview a candidate, their name must immediately be released to the public. And as you can imagine, when you have people who are in very high and public roles, the folks that we're going after are the best of the best and likely happy in their jobs, they have a major concern about their names becoming public and then not getting the position. And if you're thinking of, I'll just use the example of a sitting president. If 2 years ago we found out that Eric Kaler were the finalists for a job at a different place, the board would probably have significantly considered removing him from his job. And so most places are in a state of, if their sitting president, we actually just witnessed this in Ohio, not in the last year, where their sitting president became a public finalist for, I think, Florida International, and didn't get the job, and then came back to his institution and his board said, sorry, but we're removing you from your job. We might see a situation where there are, some provosts or folks from other industries that might be more willing to go public. But I can say that the little bit that I know from previous processes that we've had at the university have been situations where there were multiple finalists, and then at the very end they said, I can't risk my job and not getting this one at the University of Minnesota, and they dropped out. So we have no control over that, unfortunately, but we are hopeful that we will be able to get at least more than one finalist to come out publicly. The second question about vetting processes and background checks. So that happens is immediately once someone shows interest, and our search firm has contacts throughout the world that they are able to contact and talk to. And really what we're doing when we're having these conversations with folks is we're obviously going to what references were provided by a candidate, but we're going even further than that to say, let's talk to folks that they probably don't want us to talk to. And so we're talking to them. So there's the kind of technical, vetting process, if you will, where you scrub their background and that type of thing. But then there's a whole lot of other conversations that are happening as well. Alberto, anything that you want to add to that?
Yeah, to the first part of how do we keep people from dropping out, Regent Omari is right on target. We can't prevent anybody from dropping out, but we can do a few things to try to minimize that risk. And the biggest thing that we could do, and the best thing, is to make sure that we inform the candidate of what the process is going to look like from beginning to end, and at what point their name will become public, so that if they are bothered by the public exposure aspect of the search, then we need to know that as soon as possible, because then that might impact the way the committee will view that particular candidate. So by informing the candidate of what the expectation is from the committee for them, that's number one. Number two is to make sure that as we move forward in the process, that that all parties are informed of what the level of interest is of that particular candidate. And then third is to continue to highlight the positive aspects of joining the University of Minnesota. And while there may be some risk involved, the selection as the next president also has some significant rewards. And so it will be through some encouragement that there is going to be some risk attached, but that if they stay through the course and are selected, then the reward is also very great. With regard to the background checks, Regent Omari is again very much on top of this. That it's going to be a multi-pronged approach to try to generate as much information about the candidate well before the public aspect of it, so that the committee members will have ample opportunity to review the background, review any potential issues, so we again minimize and take away the risk of having a candidate who has aspects of the background that could be problematic or potentially embarrassing to the university. We want to make sure that we vet that part as early as possible to remove that risk to the university. And so know that we will be working very closely, leveraging our resources and working with the committee and the board in order to make sure that we vet the candidates properly and early on.
And then, I might just add to say, at the end of the day, in full transparency, the search firm will tell us everything they found and all the references and background and so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, it's up to the regents to decide. And so, it's a joint conversation, and in some instances, I'm not saying this will be the case by any means, but in some instances, folks will look at a candidate and say, you know what, this could be a high risk, high reward, and decide to go with that person. And we see it, across the country all the time where folks decide to go that direction. And so, the firm does its part, but at the end of the day, and I think this is an important thing to hammer home as folks are wondering, what's the role of the firm and what's the role of the committee, and then what's the role of the regents. At the end of the day, the firm does not hire the president and does not decide who's going to be the president. Matter of fact, the committee doesn't even decide that. The regents do that. And so, it's important to keep in mind that the firm works for us, for the committee and for the regents. And so we drive that part of it, and then it'll come down to the regents in the long run of who is the 17th president of the university.
We do have another question. Where can I find a list of the 11 committee members chosen to help with the presidential search?
So on the presidential search website, that's on the slide that I think you can see right now, there's several different links on there. And one of them is the Presidential Search Advisory Committee, and it's 23 of us. It is a big number, but we have a lot of constituents that are interested in, like I said, based on the 500 nominations. So the 23-person committee is listed on there with bios as well.
And another question, do you think someone from the business world would have a skill set that would allow them to drive the U in the right direction? I'm thinking of someone like Indra Nooyi, who recently resigned as the CEO of Pepsi. Or someone must have a CV full of academia, or must someone have a CV full of academic experiences?
Well, so I'll start with the last question. It depends who you ask, whether or not someone needs to have a CV full of academia experiences. And this is kind of what I was mentioning earlier. Someone says go left and someone else says go right. It holds for this as well. And so, you'll be in a listening session and you'll hear overwhelmingly, you must hire an academic that climbed the ranks from faculty. I mean, no, not even a negotiation, just it absolutely has to be someone from academia. And then you'll go to another meeting and someone will say, you cannot hire an academic. But to answer the first part of your question, yeah, I think there are people who could come in and effectively navigate a higher educational institution. I think it's a big piece of it is that beginning phase and being able to come in right away on solid ground. And I think for a lot of higher education institutions across the country, the beginning part is the hardest part if it's not a traditional academic, where folks will be very skeptical if you were to bring in someone who doesn't have higher education experience. What is becoming more common across the nation and trends that we're starting to see is that folks from the business world, former politicians, folks who have run large complex organizations and don't have a lot of higher education experience are becoming more and more popular and being hired as presidents. And there's examples all across the country, some that have gone really well, some that have not gone really well, and some that, depending on who you ask, have gone well. And so there's plenty of examples that we can point to: Florida State, University of Pittsburgh, of course, the University of California system. We can point to Oklahoma, who just hired a business person. Of course, Purdue, the former governor of Indiana, is now the president there. So there's certainly examples that you can turn to. And again, depending on who you ask, I think there's varying opinions of whether or not it's working. And some, I'd say the verdict is still out, and we haven't actually been able to see long term where things will go. Another trend that we're starting to see is folks who kind of have a mix of both, who have either gone on to get a lot of higher education or advanced degrees, and then perhaps worked maybe in government, but not an actual politician in a service role, but worked in some sort of government affiliated organization, or maybe ran a foundation, and then are coming back into academia and taking presidency. So a good example is at that one school to our east, they wear some color like red and have some rodent as their mascot. They actually are an example, their flagship in Madison, of someone who did not go the traditional academic route, and she's the sitting president at Madison.
Well, that somewhat segues into the next question here. Will the search committee also look at people with no prior experience or minimal experience in higher education? Is there a requirement that the candidate have experience in public institutions of some sort, either educational or other public institutions?
So there's no requirement. We haven't put out that you have to have an exact requirement in that sense. But also on the website, what you'll be able to find is the core criteria that the regents voted on in September. And so that has a list of kind of forward-thinking, larger ideas around a type of candidate and the criteria that we'll be looking for. And if you read that, you can imagine that some of those folks will be able to come from different areas. But I'll emphasize that the candidates must have a deep understanding of, the public sector and public institutions, even if they haven't necessarily worked in it, because it's so very important that we uphold and maintain the nature of a public institution that with a public mission to the state of Minnesota as well as the rest of the world.
Another question, what type of background would an internal candidate, meaning a current U of M staff member, need to have to be hired as president? Without experience as president at another college, could they be able to command our massive university system?
Well, I think so. I'll direct you again to the core criteria, because that will give a good type of, a good idea of what we're looking for. Again, understanding the public mission of the institution, understanding of budgets, understanding complex organizations, the multiple facets of the institution, because it's so vast and wide. And then, a commitment to the tripartite mission of education, research, and outreach / service are all things that are important. I'll say traditionally what you see are folks who are either sitting provosts moving into presidencies. More recently, you've seen trends where some deans of major colleges, a larger college that's done well, at times are moving into presidencies. You'll see a lot of vice presidents for research these days that are taking the step up without going into the provost position. So there's certainly oftentimes internal candidates that become, if nothing else, a finalist for a presidency, or make some sort of a move from a different institution where they were the number 2 and then come in. Thinking about and keeping in mind that the skill set for a lot of the roles within a higher education institution are very different from the skill set that a president needs. And so it definitely takes someone who has all those things that I mentioned, but then it takes someone with another level of skills, different skills that can be the president and be external facing and really understands athletics and the medical impact that we have, and obviously the academic piece of it, but then fundraising and the legislature, the business community, so on and so forth.
We have another question now. Regent Omari mentioned a few other major universities who have conducted president searches lately. What best practices and information sharing does the committee have with those institutions?
So I'll start this, and then I'll shift to Alberto to add some light to it. I've had conversations with folks, and the Regent staff has had significant conversations with other institutions who have done this recently and have informed us a lot about kind of the do's and don'ts and things to keep in mind as you're going forward, how to, work with a search firm, where to be looking, that type of thing. And so, some of the things really get down to the nitty and gritty of, how you move a committee forward, how you convene the committee to a place of good, healthy debate and conversation, but then moving to consensus as you go. And I mean, much of this stuff is similar to, other, groups that are formed. But, the bigger things are, I think, making sure that folks, to the best of their ability, are pivoting and controlling from biases that they bring into the room, making sure that folks are airing out any early desires or viewpoints that they have that might challenge their perspectives as they're having conversations, making sure that we can have folks formulate their own opinions ahead of time when they come into the room, but a willingness to change perspectives if they're persuaded in that direction. And then I think I'll ask Alberto to jump in, because this is what he does. So he has all kinds of best practices, and between his best practices and what I come with, we're able to tag team pretty well. Alberto?
Yeah. So we constantly monitor the searches that take place at other institutions, not only those that we conduct ourselves, but those that are conducted by other firms and those that are conducted independently by the universities themselves. And in doing so, we pay attention to practices that they engage in that are different from our own, that result in either the recruitment of stronger candidates, the retention of candidates, or the vetting of candidates. And what we do is incorporate them in our own practices. So we're constantly looking to see if there's something different that could be done in order to be able to generate not only a higher level of and quality of candidate, but also to improve the vetting process. Those practices and new ideas are then shared with the search committee for the search committee to then decide as to whether or not it wishes to incorporate them in their process going forward. So yes, please know that we do monitor what takes place, and we do try to share those practices that we feel will generate a better outcome. And then that better outcome is not only a quality candidate, but frankly, as the question was raised previously, will enhance the vetting process.
We have another question now. I'm surprised to see so many committee members, and the questioner says almost half, are current employees of the U. I realize they hold a vested interest in the search, but wouldn't folks with different backgrounds add to the diversity of the search, aka more folks that work outside of academia?
So without going too deep into what's already done, because the committee has been decided and the chair and the vice chair of the board are the ones who formulated the committee, what I'll say is I had a lot of folks say, I'm surprised there aren't more folks from inside the university on the search. And what they did was came up with some themes, not themes, but types of stakeholders that are important to the search. So you'll notice there's faculty, there's staff people, there's students, and then business, community, philanthropy, that type of thing. And from there started to formulate the folks that they thought and how many should be from each of those constituencies. And there's a reality of this, and I'll speak specifically to faculty. There's a reality of this, that faculty are one of the most important players in the success of a president. And so making sure that we are adequately represented from the faculty, I would argue is a very smart and important way to go. The other thing to keep in mind that hopefully will offer some reassurance in this is that we are doing tons of listening sessions. And so even if someone's not on the committee, we can't deny what we're hearing because it's documented and we have it in front of us. So we're having so many opportunities to hear from folks outside the institution, including business and other communities as well.
Regent Omari, as the Board of Regents shapes the job description, what priorities do you want the next president to address?
Some of these really come back to and are directly in line with what we've been hearing from the listening sessions. And those are some of the ones that I was mentioning earlier. But I think what I'll do is I'll come back and I'll highlight 2 or 3. One comes back to this idea of system. And the way that I'll frame this conversation is something that the Regents have been very interested in over the past 2 to 3 years, which is having a vision and a system-wide strategic planning framework that is going to drive the 5 campuses that touch all 87 counties within the state forward. And so a major priority for the board as we think about this moving forward, and again, I say this, we've been hearing it from the community as well, is we need a visionary who's going to inspire, and be able to push forward a plan that is inclusive of the talent that we have at all 5 of our campuses, and including extension and other components and legs, if you will, of the institution. So that's one. The second one that is extremely important, and I think it's not unique to the University of Minnesota, is what do we do about the future of higher education and the funding / budget models? And so what we're really thinking about is that the 2 primary revenue sources for our institution is state funding and tuition. And so those are the levers that can be pulled on. And we estimate that state funding, while our state is one of the highest dollar amounts in the entire country, the fraction of the full pie continues to decrease and is in line with a lot of other states. And so our estimation is that that fraction and number, the dollar amount, will not go up. And so what folks are talking about, and what we've been very adamant about, are finding new ways to think about how we do higher education. So we need someone who can come in with, fresh and innovative ideas around how we bring in new money, how we, if we can, control cost, and so on and so forth. So those are our 2 primary ones. And then I'll just give like some not anecdotal, but some other ones. I mean, one is we're in the middle of a $4 billion campaign. So as soon as the next president gets here, they will have to be fully caught up on that and drive that forward, because we're well on our way to the largest campaign that we've ever had in the institution. Other things that we're looking at and very interested in are maintaining and then growing and building our partnerships. And when I say partnerships, that means with the legislature, that means with the business community, that means with the agriculture community, so on and so forth. So making sure that we maintain and then move those partnerships up even more.
Our next question is, when folks are looking to apply for the president job, I imagine there are some things that are turnoffs to the role. Other than the weather, Minnesota, what are the downsides to this job?
We asked, you might laugh at this, but we asked folks what are the attributes and the reasons why people should want to come to Minnesota. And when we were in Crookston, they said the weather is a reason why people should want to come. And they were not joking. Because as we know, it's much colder up there than it is down here. But, I don't think that there's a whole lot of specific downsides of this job. Particularly, I think the higher ed trends are what might turn people off more generally, right? So again, coming back to the idea of folks, a lot of people questioning the value of higher education, its need, the cost, so on and so forth. I think folks wondering what's going to happen with state legislatures, because as we know, the funding has continued to go down since the Great Recession. And so I don't know that it's there. I haven't heard things that say why someone would not want to come here specifically. However, I think a lot of those interests that are across the country rely here too.
Our next question is, given the recent experience with state politics' impact on the regent selection process, how will this process manage politics from the legislature going forward?
Well, so as we get elected to serve as regents, one of our major goals is to hire the president and be the boss of the president, if you will. And so this is 100% and solely up to us. And the legislature certainly has input. And I've been talking to a whole lot of folks from local government, and never once have I heard you should hire this person. I've certainly heard people give me traits and qualities that they think, and a lot of them are in line with what I'm hearing from other people that I'm talking to. And so, I think it's goes without saying that the legislature is interested, but by no means will they have any sort of last say or significant oversight over who we hire. I'll also mention that personally, even as someone who is gearing up to run for the Board of Regents again, I would rather choose the candidate that I think is going to be the best for the institution running. And if that means that I run the risk of not becoming a regent again, then that's just the way it will go from my personal perspective. I can't speak for the other board members though.
Regent Omari, as you've traveled the state with the listening sessions, obviously you've made it to Crookston, Morris, Duluth, Rochester, the other U of M campuses. The U of M, of course, has a presence in each of Minnesota's 87 counties through extension. Are you hearing any concerns that are uniquely regional at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think the uniquely regional components are when folks say at Crookston, for example, say the Crookston campus is one of the major economic drivers of that region of the state, right? And so we know that the university as a whole has an $8.6, I think, billion impact on the state. But in certain regions, particularly smaller ones, a campus like Crookston is one of the biggest drivers. And folks have a sense of, you know, what will happen to the region if we don't thrive. And so that's something that you hear that's a bit unique in different areas. I'd say, you know, some of the other uniqueness and unique needs or concerns really do have to do with the Morris and Crookston campus, because the nature of where they're at, particularly in competition with the Dakotas, and having seats filled is a significant thing to consider. And lots of smaller institutions around the country are facing similar challenges. So there's definitely unique needs in that sense on those two campuses. As we go to Rochester, you know, the unique needs that they have, because that campus is so different from any other campus in the entire country. They're actually one of a kind, legitimately, where we have, you know, little facilities and capital in Rochester, virtually none actually. However, we have a niche that is growing. And so when you have a niche that's growing and you don't have capital from a building and infrastructure standpoint, the challenge then is how do we grow our infrastructure so that we can have the amount or increase the amount of students. Now, obviously within that comes, we got to hire people and so on and so forth. So that's a unique need down on that campus as well.
Our next question states, one of my concerns about the fact that the regents make the final decision on the hire is that this group is quite homogenous. The writer points out 8 of the 12 regents are white men. Obviously, this is dictated by the legislature, but the writer is concerned about this demographic naturally leaning towards hiring a president that reflects themselves, meaning the Board of Regents. Can you help me understand the focus on inclusion and diversity as it relates to the search process for the new president?
So we have been, as a committee, been charged with finding the best possible candidates. And my view on this is, if the process is one where we have a robust pool that does not settle for folks that just look like me or just look like a different regent, in ensuring that we have the right pool and then forwarding the top candidates to the board, I'm confident that they will be able to see who actually is the most talented and the one that can move forward. Now, I can't do anything to not have someone favor one candidate over another, other than letting them know that I have, you know, had the opportunity to interact with and vet candidates in a way and add my input to who I might think should be the top candidate or finalist that I want to support.
Let's talk a little bit about, well, first of all, we have one more question coming in here. Sometimes Gopher sports seems to dominate headlines versus stories about our academics and research. There's often deep analysis about sports, hiring a new athletics director or a coach, for example, even though some may say this doesn't matter and is just a side business of the U. How does the president search relate to sports? In other words, do we want someone with Division I sports experience to lead the U?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, absolutely. The media oftentimes cares a whole lot more about sport, especially when it gets to front page headline, right? I mean, we're in the media actually all the time for much more positive things than negative things, quite honestly. We just, I think as humans, go read what's negative and what's on the front page, and the media oftentimes doesn't do us any favors. I think it would be great to have someone with higher ed experience, and I'll say, the reality of it is, folks, I'll just give the example of President Kaler. I mean, he was a provost in the SUNY system, and arguably he didn't have a whole lot of interaction on his own with sports, right? And so I think someone who certainly knows the importance of sports on a higher ed institution like this one is important, and someone who values it. I mean, I'll give you the example of Michigan. They hired a president who wasn't really high on sports and came in and said, whatever, sports aren't that important, and got blown up in the media and very quickly retracted from the importance of sports. And then, just generally, I mean, I guess the other thing that I'll add to this is, anyone who's coming into a role like this should be well equipped to do some research and find out what happens when an institution, small or large, makes a run in one of the major sports. Their national profile goes up, their number of applications go up, and there's a significant number of how many new applicants they have. And this is even small schools who say make a run in the, men's basketball Final Four, or randomly make it to, some football bowl game. There's no denying that. So if we find a candidate that does not know that, then we should probably be worried.
Regent Omari, you've been conducting the listening sessions throughout the state. You've been getting emails, a lot of feedback from alumni of the university, other stakeholders. Where does this process go next?
Mm-hmm. So now that we have completed the listening sessions, we are deep in the process of developing the job profile / job description. And what that looks like, the job profile is twofold. One side of it is, here are the criteria that we're looking for in the candidate. Here are the qualifications. Here are some of the opportunities and challenges you'll be facing when you come to the University of Minnesota, so on and so forth. Then the flip side of that is, now here's why you thought you had the best job in the world, but we actually have a better one for you, right? And so that other part of the profile is telling all the great things about the University of Minnesota. And the thing about it is, most folks who are even in the conversation of this job, they know about the University of Minnesota, right? However, they don't know how dope the University of Minnesota really is, right? Unless they're an internal candidate or have spent time here, right? And so our job on that side is to say, when I go to a candidate who is very happy in their job and thinks that they have the best job ever, and I tell them, I'm coming to disrupt your life, because that's exactly what we are in the business of, disrupting lives. And I come and say, I'm going to disrupt your life, and here's why you should come here. And then we're going to take that a step further, because if they have a family, we also have to talk to the family and say, this is also why you should come. And so that second half of the job profile is exactly that. It's telling them about all the wonderful things, coupled with, here's the impact that you can make when you come here. So that'll be released next week, Thursday, on the Presidential Search website. The other thing that'll pop up next Thursday is the opportunity to nominate candidates. And so to all the alumni out there, I'm not asking you to nominate candidates. I fully expect that you will nominate candidates so that we can begin to look at them, and that'll open up next Thursday. From there, the committee will be hard at work. And so not too long after that, we'll be reviewing materials and applications. We'll obviously go into an interview phase at some point where we'll be interviewing candidates. And then we're looking at the mid-December timeframe, where we will make a recommendation to the Board of Regents and turn over 3 to 4 names that say, any one of these candidates, we are confident if they become the next president of the University of Minnesota system, they will take us to great heights.
And we have another question. The president isn't exactly responsible for development and fundraising for the U, but can certainly influence this process. Excuse me. It doesn't look like this is emphasized in the core leadership criteria. How important is it to hire a president with the ability to raise funds from alumni, corporations, or the legislature?
It is extremely important, actually. And one of the things that will be highlighted in the job profile that'll be released next week is the importance of fundraising. Because the reality is, as we anticipate that governmental funding will trend downward, fundraising is going to become ever more important. And so while it's not, I mean, one could argue it's not the responsibility of the president, it is a significant amount of time that the president spends on fundraising. You know, sometimes daily, especially when you're in the middle of a campaign. The president spends a whole lot of time on the road talking to donors. And for anyone who's in higher education, it's automatically assumed. You're right, though, that there might be some folks who are not as familiar with higher education that may need to be reminded of it, and it will be pulled to the forefront in the profile.
Regent Omari, tell us a bit more about the role of the search firm that you're working with.
Yeah, so I can actually tell you a little bit about them generally, and then a little bit more about their role. So this search firm was strategically chosen because they actually have an emphasis in one of the desires that the board was looking for, and that was to look at academics as well as what has been deemed non-traditional candidates. And some of the questions that we heard earlier are in line with that, and you know, wondering if we can get folks from business and that type of thing. So they specialize in higher education searches, and they have been one of the leaders from a search firm perspective of finding candidates that are also external to higher education. And so that was one of the reasons why we chose them, because we're committed to looking broadly. The search firm is more often than not the first place that the first interaction that takes place with the candidate. Either the candidate is calling the firm or the firm is calling the candidate. And so they are in charge of the majority of recruiting and making those contacts, helping to guide and advise the search committee on how to move forward in the processes. At the end of the day, again, the search firm works for us, and then we are the end decision makers in whether the pool is deep enough, whether the pool is wide enough, and if not, I will unequivocally tell them to go back and find more candidates. And so it's a partnership that we work back and forth together in that way. And they also do the background checks and the vetting in conjunction with the committee. So we will be doing some reference checks on our own as committee members. They will be doing some background checks, and they have a external company that they actually work with on that front. They'll also be, compiling all the materials for us to review, summarizing a lot of the different things. And there was a member from the search firm on each one of the listening sessions last week and this week, so they were there to listen to what folks were saying as well. So in many ways, it's a partnership.
We have another question now. Regent Omari, I think your insight and perspective as a person of color is so important for the Regents to reflect. Your term expires in 2019. Do you plan to continue in the Regent role?
Well, thank you, first of all. I will be running for an at-large seat in the next election. So my plan, whether I plan to or not, is not so important. It depends on what the legislature decides.
And we do want to mention, if you want more information, you can search online actually for that information. We'll give you the address for the presidential search website. It's president-search.umn.edu. We'd like to thank Regent Abdul Omari for his time today and leadership in the presidential search process, and also thank Alberto Pimentel, who is the managing partner of Storbeck Pimentel and Associates. We'd like to thank you for participating in all of your wonderful questions today as well. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.